I was a normal 40-year-old woman, I thought. I was working about 60 hours a week. One evening I come in after a really long day. I was so tired. I'd always heard the word fatigue, and I didn't understand that because I was always tired. But that day, it's just, I couldn't go on. I just went to bed about 7:30 that night and been in bed about 30 minutes when I just got real uncomfortable and become very nauseated. Somehow or another, I made it to the living room where my husband was and told him, I says, there's something wrong. I said, I'm really sick, and he says that I was sweating profusely. He said he'd never seen anybody do that. As a matter of fact, my son came in the room and thought I'd got out of the shower. At that point, he said, we have to get you to the emergency room. And we got to the emergency room. Within 5 minutes, they recognized my heart attack immediately. I had never been inside of an emergency room, didn't know what to expect. But they told my husband, she's having a heart attack. At that point, I was trying to raise up and see the old lady having a heart attack because I didn't realize a 40-year-old woman could do that. I thought it must be somebody else in here besides me. That's the last thing I remember. They tell me at that point I flatlined. It took about 20 minutes. They shocked me 4 times before my heart started beating again. I still didn't understand I was in ICU, but my whole family was standing looking around me. They looked absolutely like they were looking at death. And I'm thinking, I have a stomach virus. What's wrong? I guess the saddest part was my mom. My mom cried. And I didn't know why at that point. I didn't know for several months. But basically, the doctor told them I wouldn't make it through the night. And they got to come in and say goodbye. And I guess that was the hardest part for me, was finding out how bad my heart was. Didn't know I had heart problems. Didn't know women had heart attacks. But also what effect it had on my family. I survived the night, needless to say, and the doctor told me that I'd had a major heart attack with damage to the bottom 2/3 of my heart. He said that I had an ejection fraction of 15 to 18%, which meant that there was so much damage they couldn't repair it. After a couple of days, I finally had the nerve to ask the doctor, what's going on? He says, well, your heart is damaged. You have an ejection fraction of 18 to 20%. I'm giving you 6 months. 6 months to live. Well, I had no idea what ejection fraction was. But I knew I needed to go enjoy 6 months of living. So for the next 6 months, I really did enjoy living. Ate too much, didn't exercise. I was trying to take care of myself those ways. After 6 months, I just kept living. This went on for 3 years. After 3 years, I kept doing my research. Still not finding the answers, but I did find an organization called the National Coalition for Women Living with Heart Disease. We call it Women Heart. Through them, I went to a symposium, and while I was there, we had a field day where different sales reps came in with different little things, mostly drug reps, and they had ink pens and notepads and t-shirts and all kinds of free stuff that women love. So I had my little bag, gathered up all the stuff, went and sat down, and I was going through it like Halloween candy, and told the lady next to me, I says, I'm not sure what this is, but they have really cool free gifts. And she said, that's Corig. You have to ask your doctor about it. She said, I've been on it. I've done wonderful. Go back and ask your doctor for it. So on Monday morning, I called him up and said, I want to know about this Corig. Can I take Corig? He said, sure, I have some samples here if you'd like to try them. By the afternoon, I'd taken my first dose. That's in October of 2003. During that time, he told me, you have to have a defibrillator. You're not going to make it till March, and if we don't do a defibrillator, you're just not going to live to see your first little grandson born. So I was trying to do whatever I needed to do to see my grandson born. So I went back to Rochester for a second opinion and possibly to get the defibrillator there. It took a while to get the arrangements made, but it was February of 2004, and I'd been on Corig from October till February. When I got up there, they had me set up to see a transplant doctor. They were looking at my old records and says, I'm thinking you may need a transplant. Well, then they put me through all the tests, and the cardiologist there called me in and says, Tammy, you don't need to see the transplant doctor. You don't need a defibrillator put in. We just ran all these tests, and your ejection fraction is 43%. So from October till that time, I had done nothing, no changes in my lifestyle except take Corig. 15 months later, I had another nuclear stress test done with a new cardiologist, and he comes in and tells me, Tammy, your ejection fraction is now 56%. I says, well, so what happened? Why is it so much better? 5 years ago, Dr. Doom and Gloom says it's not going to get better. And he said, it is from the Corig. He said, my patients have all done wonderful. He said, especially the heart attack patients. I'm watching their ejection fractions rise. He says, maybe yours has risen a little more than the others, but Corig is definitely improving people's ejection fraction. To me, I could have shouted because I could feel the difference. I was able to do things that I had not done in the last 5 years. I was able to finally go to the mall. I could go to the grocery store and not be exhausted. I could go out in the yard and play with my little grandson. That's the difference in an 18 to 20% ejection fraction and where I'm at today at 56%. So it's time for me to start doing some things to give back to the world. So just last week, I went to Washington, D.C. with Women Heart and had the opportunity to go visit my senators and my representatives and just tell them a few things about women and heart disease. And one of the things that while I was up there I found out really concerned me was Medicaid reform. That's something I'd never really thought a lot about, and I didn't have the energy to fight it. I was letting other people do that. But I started hearing about the Medicaid reform and how it affects everyone, but especially the elderly women in Arkansas. And I found out that if a woman is on Medicaid, she's limited to 3 prescription drugs a month. So I got to visit with one of my congressmen, and so I says to him, tell me about this Medicaid reform. And he said, well, I want to hear about the heart disease. He said, I'm very interested in that. My father just had quadruple bypass last week, so I want to hear about heart disease. I said, oh, he did? He had bypass? How's he doing? And he said, well, he's doing fine. I said, so is he on a lot of drugs now? Oh, yeah, a whole handful. I said, oh, well, okay. We'll talk about heart disease and Medicaid reform. Let's pretend for a minute that he's on Medicaid, and you have to call him up now and tell him to stop taking everything but 3 of his meds. Which 3 is he going to stop taking? Which 3 would you recommend? And he went, oh, you got me. He said, well, probably he would stop taking the 3 most expensive. And I said, exactly. That's what our elderly are facing in Arkansas every day. They're having to make those kind of decisions. So what you're doing up here, take it personal. Put a face on it. Put your dad's face on it. Put my face on it. These are the kind of people that's having to make those choices. So it's time for me to give back. I've survived. I went from being dead under paddles to standing up on the steps of the Congress building and saying, hey, I'm Tammy and I'm from Arkansas. I'm here to talk. So for the next 30 years, people are going to hear me. Everyone will know me. Oh, that's the one that had the heart attack. And she survived. She wasn't supposed to. And she's made a difference. That's what I want to do with my life.